Hello, and welcome back to the bench. We are going to be on our third installment of my budget hunting scope series. And this week we're looking at the Athlon Neos 3 to 9 by 40. But before we take a close look at this, we are going to go over some of the basic specs. First of which is that it is a 3 to 9 power with a 40mm lens. It has a length of 12.4 inches and a weight of 17 ounces, which is a little on the heavier side for these kind of scopes. They're usually 16 ounces and less, but 1 ounce isn't going to kill it. Tube diameter is 1 inch. Eye relief is 3 inches off the back, which for you magnum caliber shooters might not quite be enough. You want to, be careful when you get down to that 3-inch or less eye relief so that you aren't butting yourself in the face unintentionally. Our field of view at 100 yards is going to be 37.8 feet at 3 power, which is pretty good, and 12.6 feet at the 9 power, which is, pretty standard. Our turrets are going to be 1/4 MOA per click. Our movement per rotation is going to be 15 MOA. That's for one full 360-degree rotation of either the windage or the elevation turret. And then our turrets, wind and elevation, have a total of 80 MOA of adjustment each, which is actually pretty generous for a 1-inch diameter main body tube. Parallax is set at 100 yards, and this is a second focal plane scope. So with that out of the way, we'll go ahead and take a closer look. Starting here at the rear, gonna get that turned down. And I can tell you right away that I am a fan of this rear eyepiece and these little square ridges that they have on here. They're just enough to give you a good bite without being obnoxious. And the thickness of this is wide enough that you can get a good bit of your finger on there and easily adjust that, which is good because this is fairly stiff. It's not crazy stiff, but it is definitely something you're going to have to know that you're doing it intentionally. It's not going to get bumped and move on its own. It does have a little sound. So those threads are rubbing on each other a little bit in there, which always concerns me that it might loosen up over time. I bought this scope used off of eBay, so I don't know how used it is, but it did not come with the box. It did come with these caps. I have to assume that those are the factory caps, but I don't know for sure. But before I get distracted, let's get this cranked all the way out. There we are. Turn it back in. Ooh, it's got a little play. It's not a lot. It's not as bad as the Bushmaster or Buckmaster. There is definitely some there. Bring this up here closer to you guys. I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but it's definitely got a little play. Let me get that cranked in to where it would be set for, people with reasonable eyesight. Right there. Let's try it again. So now that play is almost completely gone. Not totally. I feel a little bit of it, but as it gets deeper into that body and has a little bit more, space in here to rest itself and secure itself, it's definitely better. So again, I will call that acceptable. Definitely not ideal. But I'm going to go ahead and start moving forward on here. We're going to get to our magnification ring and we'll crank that over to the 3 power, where we see that our little nub here is just below the 3 o'clock position. Right there. And then we'll crank it on around to the 9 o'clock. And we are just above the 9 o'clock for the 9 power. So it's basically 180 degrees. It's just not exactly 3 to 9. It's just a little off. But whatever, call it 180 degrees. And the damping is good. It's definitely stiff. But the height of this stud here gives you enough purchase for your thumb to throw it on there. It's another one of those ones where you're not just going to crank that thing over real quick. If you need to, it is going to have to be a focused effort to make that thing move. Now when you have it on the gun, you're going to have obviously something more sturdy to hold on to, but you're going to have to be careful not to lose your sight picture when you're running that thing, because you could easily tip the gun and lose your sight picture with how tight that is. Let's see if it has any play in it. Ooh, very little. I like that. Let's try it over here. Maybe just, yeah, a little bit more there. Still not much. It's obviously not going to be completely tight because it has to be able to move, but that is doing better than the Crossfire did. So I'm going to call that a pass. I'm pleased with that. And we will go ahead and move forward and take a look at our tube and our anodization. And this was in the rings once, and we do not see any marks from those rings, which by the time you see this, that review should already be out. If you want to look at that review, you can. Other than that, the finish on this one is a little bit more gloss. It's not quite as flat, matte finish, but that also means that it does not scuff as easily as some of those more matte finished rifle scopes that I've looked at. But it is a little more shiny, so if you don't like a shinier finish, this may not be the one for you. And there is a slight difference. The black looks pretty similar, but the finish as far as matte versus satin, just a little bit more matte back there. So probably just a little bit different part of the process, or something was changed a little bit, not quite the same. We don't have quite identical finishes on those two sections, which is something I've seen in quite a few scopes, not just these cheap ones where, as the different parts are finished differently, they're just not quite the same. But other than that, I like the finish. It's definitely even. There's no thin spots. There's no spots where it looks like the anodization didn't stick at all. I call that a good finish. So we'll go ahead and pop this turret off, take a peek underneath. We have metal caps. Yes, those are good. And clean threads. Don't see any transfer of material from the what looked like maybe nickel plated threads on that erector, probably brass with nickel plating. I highly doubt that those are stainless steel. That'd be great if they are, but I don't think they are. How about that turret? Ooh, those are pretty good. My opinion of them when I used them the other day at the range was positive, and I think y'all are gonna like what you see when we put it in the fixture over there and get a closer look at it. 0 resettable, marked for our rotation, counterclockwise for up, and our quarter MOA per click. That is also a steel dial, or well, it's aluminum. I don't have a magnet handy, but it's metal, not plastic. The windage, similar story, same kind of nickel plated threads, good clean threads inside our cap, which is also aluminum turret knob up here, counterclockwise for our right, and marked for a quarter MOA per click. But as I said, we're going to get a much closer look at those dials when I get it set up in the fixture over here. Finally, we're going to go ahead and look at our front objective. There is no threading to accommodate a sunshade. There's just the retaining ring, and across this transition from the body to this retaining ring, there is a step. It is not perfectly centered, but it is not anything that will affect the functional use of it. And overall, I would say it's pretty good. And we will move on and take a closer look at the reticle and the turrets after we get the weight. I always try to forget that, and to see how it stacks up. Manufacturer says 17 ounces. We are going to get half an ounce less, 16.5. So that's good. I like it when it's light compared to what the manufacturer says. Hold on, let me put that back on there. Put the caps. Then we're at 17.4. All right, so now we know. And we can move on and look at the turrets and that reticle in more detail. I have it set up now to look at our reticle, and as we can see, it is a simple duplex type reticle where the thin lines there towards the center are going to be 0.18 of an MOA in thickness, and the thicker lines that go out to the edge are going to be 0.7 MOA in thickness. And the only other measurement that is of any importance is the 4.5 MOA where in distance from the center before you go out to those thicker lines. And that's on all four stadia, the 3, 6, 9, and 12. You have a 0.4 or 4.5 MOA of thin line before you get out to that thicker line. And other than that, we're going to run through our magnification range. I currently have us at the maximum at 9. Athlon states that this scope has a 3-inch approximate eye relief. I think there's just a little bit of adjustability, maybe 1/8 of an inch in either direction, but it basically has a 3-inch eye relief. And you can see as we go through the power range from 3 back up to 9, there's no tunneling, there's not a bunch of shadows that creep in, so you're not going to have to be moving your head around a whole bunch when you're using this to maintain that well lit field of view. And then I will point out the amount of the bezel that we're seeing around the edge of our field of view. It's not thin, it's not crazy thick, it's certainly not the worst of the scopes that I'm reviewing in this budget scope series, but it is there, it is consistent. And when I was out using this scope the other day, I actually feel like maybe it was just a little bit thinner to the naked eye, but this is what we're going to see approximately as we're going through this review. And with all that being said, I am going to go ahead and reposition us to look at our turrets. I've adjusted our position, and now we can take a close look at these turrets. We're going to start with the elevation. And the first thing I'm going to do is give it a spin so that you all can see and hear what it sounds like. And there you have it. If it sounded to you like those have nice positive clicks that have very little lash when it's in its detent, then you would be correct. These are actually quite nice turrets. I also appreciate the fact that it has underneath here a series of revolution counters, so that if you for some reason had one load zeroed on this but you needed to make a significant adjustment that was going to take you more than a full revolution, you could notate your starting revolution and then go back to that if you were going to be returning to some other load that you had previously zeroed the scope on. That's a nice little feature that you usually don't see in these very budget-minded scopes. So I do appreciate that they included that. The knurling on this knob could be a little more aggressive. It's enough with my bare fingers, but if my fingers were cold, or if I had gloves on, or these were just a little slippery with some sweat or something, those might be difficult to get a good grip on. That's really just a nitpick. They're not bad, they're just not as sharp of a knurling on there as I would have liked. And then one other nice feature of these is that they are resettable. Go ahead and get that little screw out of there and drop it, because why not? And you see that it is a short thread on there, but it is not a particularly thin thread, so that's good. Let's set that out of the way. And then this turret is on there pretty tight, or the cap I should say. There we go. And underneath there we're able to see a chrome plated erector set, and on the inside of here are the corresponding splines to match that top of the erector. I don't see any O-rings. There's one here for the cap, but I don't see any on the inside of there. I have no doubt that there are some. They're just going to be down below that top plate that we can't see past. I'll go ahead and get this set back on here. You notice that the 0 does not line up quite right. It's not perfect, it's a little off. Maybe like a half a tooth. There's not going to be much you can do about that. You just have to pick one side of the zeroed hash or the other, and just do it consistently. I'll go ahead and get this started back on, get it tightened down. And then I think we can go ahead and move on to the windage turret. Now I have us set to look at this windage turret. And it has the same style cap as the elevation, also aluminum. And the turret is essentially the same mechanically, though it is marked in left and right rotation. Because we see it goes 1, 2, 3 in both directions around to 7 here at the rear. And so that is going to be a little bit helpful. So if you're trying to make adjustments in one direction, as long as you know that counterclockwise is for the right and clockwise is for the left, then you can go ahead and count those MOA at least as far as you get back around here to the back, and then you're gonna have to remember which direction you're going. I do wish they would put the left and right arrow or some sort of notation out here on the face where it's easy to see from the shooter's perspective, but in a budget scope that may be asking for just a little too much. I do like the fact that it has the rev counter. I would personally give that up for that left and right rotation note, because I don't foresee having to make large adjustments left and right on your wind and then needing to know where your 0 was originally. But that's just my preference. If I was designing this scope, how I would have done it. But we see what Athlon has chosen to do instead. Like the elevation turret, this one is also resettable for 0. Get out of there. It has a very similar screw. It uses a large flat Phillips. I suppose you could probably get that off of there with the bullet casing as well. And then it is also quite tight. And we see that it is marked for right rotation and quarter MOA clicks. And that it has the same corresponding splines inside the cap. I'm going to go ahead and get that put back on. And for whatever reason, that one lines up just a little bit better than our elevation turret did. Now, the real fun is going to be getting this little screw started without dropping it. And there we go. So I'm going to give this another little spin so you can hear it again. The detents on this one are not quite as crisp as the elevation, nor are they quite as loud, though they do have a nice positive detent. There's just a little bit more play in there, and I think that might just be because the spring holding it in position is not as strong, so it's just allowing for that little bit of extra play. But anyway, that's what we have. I think it's good. Metal cap, metal turret. Those are the sorts of things you want. This can lend for better durability long term. But I think we've spent enough time here on our turrets, and we will go ahead, take it outside, and start looking through it at some other sorts of targets. So now I have us out here to take a look through our scope, and the first thing we're going to do is start at the 50-yard line to take a look at our eye chart, and we are going to be starting at the 3x magnification. And even here at the bottom end of the magnification range, we're already getting a pretty good image. Our edge-to-edge clarity is good, though there is Maybe just a little bit of a roll off, a little softness out there towards the very edge of the lens. But we're not seeing too much glare coming off of that window out there where the sun is shining off of it. I can tell you with the naked eye it is significantly worse. But we'll go ahead and get zoomed in. Get that brightness adjusted just a little bit. And even with our fixed parallax, we have a decent image. Fortunately, we're having, a very simple crosshair reticle, so it's not going to be taking up basically any of our image, not going to be blocking or obstructing any of those smaller elements. But our focus could be ever so slightly better, and I will adjust that real quick. And so with that focus adjusted to bias our eye chart down there, you see that we have a very nice image. The first two, maybe the third line of those letters is clear, and definitely the first two lines of the numbers are clear. We can make out all of the small elements on the playing cards. Today seems to be a fairly popular day out here with a near constant stream of vehicles. So I am going to move our point of aim just up a little bit to highlight how little of those playing cards that reticle is going to take up, and how even with it being just slightly blurry compared to our image, the simplicity of it makes it functional because we're not trying to see anything but our center of the crosshair. What I am going to do is pan to the left over here to some words on the side of our building that you may be able to see just outside the scope field of view on the camera. And we'll see how our depth of field really does when things get much closer to us than our 100-yard parallax. And to be completely honest, I am really pleased with that. I can sharpen it up just a little bit, and you see how that reticle gets a little bit fuzzy. But if you were taking shots at that distance at, deer size wildlife or something like that, or even IPSC targets or steel plates, anything bigger than about 4 MOA, you're going to have no problem, because those heavy stadia lines that come in almost to the center are still going to let you bracket targets, even when you can't make out the dead center of that crosshair as well as you might like. I'm going to just roll this back to focus on our reticle, and you can see how then, if you were focused on the reticle, those letters get a little bit blurry, but they're all still legible and really not giving us any trouble. So the last thing I want to do is pan this up just a little bit, adjust our brightness, and then we're going to look for fisheye as we pan back across this building, looking at those vertical slats of the siding on the wood siding. And it appears that there may be just a little bit. It straightens out pretty well across the center of the field of view, but there is just a little bit of bend in those straight lines as they get out there towards maybe the last 20% on either side. But overall, it's doing pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and swing us back over here to the car, take a quick look and see how much glare we're getting off of it. Look at our chromatic aberration, which right there where the sun's intensity is the worst, we definitely see some purple and some pink and some red peeking out of that what should otherwise be white. But above the little bullseye there, where the white sheet of paper is up against our dark tint, the chromatic aberration is under control. That also leads to the point of our color representation, which on the yellow, blue, and red bullseye is good. On our color spectrum cards over there, our little color chart also looks very well represented. We can make out the difference between the oranges and the reds, the blues and the greens, as well as our tactical black, gray, green, tan, and brown. So I think from here, I will go ahead and move us out to the 100-yard line and try and see how it looks out that distance. So now I have us set up at the 100-yard line, and we are still presented with quite a nice view. Let me crank us back down to the 3 power first. Try to have some sense of organization on this. And our field of view is still good. We don't see any additional softness or falling off of that fisheye as we get out there to those longer distances in the trees. And our image of the SUV is still pretty darn good. Now I will zoom us back in and get us a look at our eye chart, get that brightness down. And we see that we still make out much of the same detail. All of it's just obviously smaller, but we can still see that spade on the ace of spades. We can still make out the first 2 lines of the letters. Definitely the first line of the numbers. You will have to be the judge about the second line of numbers. They're just a little too small for me to see on my little screen. But the overall image does look quite nice. Now we've lost a little bit of our illumination of our sunlight because the sun has drifted behind some clouds, but we may see it reemerge here briefly. They are hit or miss. But on our color chart, there on the right side, we still see a very nice representation of those individual color samples. We can still see our surprise chicken and our, let's see, the overall chromatic aberration still looking quite good. So I am happy with the way that looks. Again, we have a very simple reticle. It is not going to be obstructing much of our target as I place it here on the center of our bullseye, or attempt to place it on the center of the bullseye. But you can see that it's not going to hinder you in getting an accurate 0, which is important, obviously, for the purpose of hunting or target shooting. You just quit fussing with it. There we go, it's a little closer. But we can also make out all 3 colors of that bullseye, the yellow, the blue, and the red. And what I'm going to do real quick is adjust this brightness one more time. And I'm going to pan to our right and give us an idea of what this is going to look like in this tree, foresty, green background at distances that are going to range from 130 yards right behind the SUV. And then as we pan over to the road, where we see the road disappear behind some bushes, that tree line back there is going to be at 200 yards. So it's just going to give us an idea of our depth of field for this scope. So right there, 30 yards. And this whole tree line here is going to be at approximately 30 yards. It's all looking pretty, or 130 yards, excuse me. 30 yards past the SUV. And then right here, where we get up in those trees, right behind where the road disappears back there, that is going to be at 200 yards. And honestly, it still looks pretty good. It's not crystal clear and razor sharp, but if there was, any number of different medium-sized game back there, you would have no challenge using that crosshair, taking that shot, as long as you have established like a 200-yard point blank, 0, where anything between point blank and 200 yards is going to be just a dead-on hold, and the only thing you need to worry about is your windage. But overall, I think that gives us a useful idea of what this scope will do. You do see just a little bit of fisheye as we pan across there. The image just warps a teeny little bit. It's not terrible, but it is noticeable. And here we have the sun has come back, and we have a brighter image on that color chart, but our chromatic aberration is still under control. It's just a pile of sand back there at about 135 yards. But overall, I'm pretty happy with that. So I will box this up and take us out into the floodplain and look at some stuff at extended distances. We have relocated and now we are out here in the floodplain to take a look at some area rules and regulation signs and a couple of buildings to get an idea of whether or not this scope is going to perform well at extended distances. And before us we have the rules and regulation signs at about 310 yards, currently at 3 power magnification. I will go ahead and get us zoomed in, taking a note of just how decent that image already looks as far as depth of field and overall sharpness. And then we get up here to the 9 power. I'm going to go ahead and get my brightness sorted. I can get it to cooperate with me. And while the depth of field looked pretty good there at 3x, I think we have gotten to the point where we're asking just a little bit too much of our fixed parallax, and our signs out there at 300 yards are looking pretty fuzzy. So what I will do is adjust our focus to bias those signs and just generally the foliage out there, even the stuff behind our signs. There, I think I got my brightness where I want it. And we can see that those signs, although they have the sun shining on them directly here this afternoon, are still easily made out for their individual sheets. The words on them, not so much. We clearly see that there is text on them, but it is not legible. It's a little too washed out. Even if I pan up here, try to get a little bit better image of that, it is just not really gonna work for us, I don't think. Got to bring that brightness way down, at which point now we can see those lines of text even though they are still not legible. That being said, it's actually a pretty decent image. And as far as our reticle, given the simplicity of it and the fact that your only point of reference for the aim is going to be the center of your duplex reticle, even though it's out of focus, it is still, reasonably useful. Now, you wouldn't be using that at this distance anyway, because if you had this zeroed for 100 yards, then you would be having to adjust just Kentucky wind style for your point of aim, which would probably put you somewhere about there if you were looking to shoot the middle of that sheet of paper. But that being said, our color representation is good, as is our overall sharpness. Pretty happy with that. The grass there at the bottom, I'm going to give you some ranges. The grass there at the bottom, the tan stalks, are at about 130 yards. Signs are at 310. The trees on the berm behind the signs are at 375. So I'm actually pretty happy with that depth of field when we're biased on our target and not on our reticle. I am going to go ahead and bring that back to the reticle, right about there, and we're going to pan to our left and look at the first building. And we're going to be watching some of these power poles to see if there is any significant fisheye. Decent on that one. Obviously our background as it goes out there, it's getting pretty fuzzy. I might have just a little bit of bend in it, and then we're going to catch our first building here and settle up here on our transformers. And while the sharpness is not perfect, with a good contrast, like those transformers, or if you were shooting at, painted steel targets or something like that, torso size, you're going to have no trouble making those out behind that reticle. What I am going to do, again, is change our focus to bias the target. Bring that brightness down just a little bit. We can see how much better that image looks. Even those small transformers that are about soda can size, or excuse me, small insulators that are about soda can size on top of the transformer, Let me see if I can get this crosshair to set on one. Not quite, but pretty close. Fiddle with that just a minute. There we go, I got that settled a little bit more on those insulators. You can see that the fineness of that crosshair is not going to obstruct those very much. But as before, at 310 yards, unless you have intentionally zeroed your scope at that distance, you are not going to be using the center of your crosshair for that anyway. Pardon me having to keep adjusting this brightness, but we have some clouds drifting in front of and then out from in front of the sun. And it's just going to be a little bit of a fight to keep this brightness where I want it. But on the building itself, our chromatic aberration looks really nice. Not hardly any, maybe just a little bit, especially as that sun starts to come out again. And our field of view definitely has a little bit of softness out there at the edges, especially those things that are considerably further away and would probably require, again, a difference in focus because of the distance and the lack of parallax adjustment. But we can make out the individual grout lines. We can see, I think I got a little bit better there. We can see those individual power lines that are coming out from behind the tree and going out to the power pole. We can make out our little red stickers. We can make out quite a bit of damage from the hail on that pipe. And all that being said, our simple crosshair reticle is still going to do, basic duplex reticle kind of stuff. Color representation is good. And I think overall the scope is performing admirably for its price point. You'll have to look at those individual sections of the structure holding up that brick building and determine if you can see those bolt heads or not, because I can't quite make them out on my screen, but I suspect that they may be visible. That being said, I think we've seen what we need to see here at 300 yards, and we are going to go to our left and have a look at our next building. But first I need to get that dialed back to focus on the reticle so we can check our fisheye as we go across. It still looks pretty good. Yep. Just about there. And here we are. I've lined that up where I have because it's going to be a little bit better representation of what your drop would be if you had to just do some Kentucky windage and hold high. You're going to be in about that range out there at 500 yards. But we see the same thing we saw at 300 yards, and that the reticle is sharp and our building and our power pole down there are quite blurry. I have gone ahead and made that adjustment to bring those into a little bit better sharpness. And honestly, this scope is doing a really nice job of giving us a good, clean image once we are focused on the building and not on our reticle. But the problem with that is that at that distance, you're basically going to be using the top of your 6 o'clock stadia where the line thickens up if you want any sort of reference for aim, because the crosshair has become so blurry that I don't know that you can really say that you're going to make that out well, even in that high contrast of that light colored transformer. But as far as image quality, we can make out quite a bit of the small details on the building. I would say that that brickwork is not super sharp, but you can tell that it is brickwork. And the rails, and even the steps on the bottom side of those stairs, where you can kind of see them from underneath, that's a pretty decent image. Pretty happy with that. And let's see, we can see quite a bit of detail in our grass down there below, though the stuff at the very bottom edge, which is going to be at about 370 yards, is pretty fuzzy. Yeah. That stuff where, if you look at the bottom of that power pole, everything from that brown power pole, at that base of that down, is looking kind of soft. But that's true pretty much all the way around our field of view there. But what I want to do now is put the focus back on our reticle. Or no, excuse me, I'm going to leave it out here on this one. Got to make sure I'm fair to this thing. And then we're going to pan back across and have a look at these power poles and see what the fisheye looks like when we're target focused and not reticle focused. We do see just a little bit of that fisheye flex in that power pole. Not a lot, but there's some there. And we do see a bit of chromatic aberration. If you look out there towards the edges of our field of view, the chromatic aberration does get a little worse. Where it's fairly well controlled in the center, it's getting a little bit out of control when we go out there to the edges. And that's just that lens is, struggling to land all of that different colors of light back at our point of focus evenly, and so you're just going to see that different spectrum of light splayed out like a little rainbow. Yeah, we're definitely seeing a little bit more fisheye than we did when we were reticle focused. And to let a little truck go by, and if you notice a little bit more dust in the air, that is because he kicked up a pretty decent little cloud of dust. So that brings us back to our regulation signs. And while there's a little bit of dust in the air muddling up that image, you're going to see this truck go by and kick up some more. I would say that this scope has performed pretty well. I don't have a bunch of complaints. If I can get this back on our reticle, nice and sharp. And that is what we're going to have to work with. But I don't have much else to say. And we are going to go ahead, head back to the bench, and wrap this video up. Here we are, back at the bench to wrap this video up and give you my final thoughts on the Athlon Neos rifle scope. I have my notes so that I can stay on track and not go down any rabbit trails. And I will start with what I think are the pros of this scope. And the first and foremost of those is the image sharpness. It is, of the four that I've reviewed so far, either the sharpest image or tied with the Sig Sauer for the best overall image. And that is, considering edge to edge at the maximum zoom and the minimum zoom, I think this one performed actually quite well. The next thing that I liked about this scope was honestly the simplicity of the duplex reticle, given the idea that this is for a basic hunting rifle. It doesn't have a whole bunch of extra frills or drops or any of that that's going to do you any good or that you're going to be able to use, but the thickness of those lines, even when we were at distances that were not the parallax distance of 100 yards, it was still a usable reticle everywhere from 50 yards out to 200 yards. And if you have that paired with the appropriate 200 yard zero or 150 yard zero, you are going to be able to do point blank aiming anywhere from literally point blank 25 yards all the way out to maybe 250 yards. So it's just a reticle that will work for that simple hunting setup. My third thing, and probably maybe tied with how much I like the sharpness, is the turrets. Athlon went ahead and put just a very nice set of functional turrets in this thing that have good clicks that are nice and audible, and more than that, they gave us a good zero reference with a rotation indicator. And if you've ever changed loads from one season to the next where you just wanted to try a different load for once, or you just want to go out to the range and shoot with training ammo versus your hunting ammo, but you wanted to have it zeroed, you can do that with that, because you can make a note of where you have it zeroed for your hunting ammo and then do whatever adjustments you need to do in order to dial in like a plinking load, and then go right back to where you need it to be when you want to hunt. So that just that little inclusion of that rev counter and that good 0 point that's on the drum of the dial really just makes those turrets a step ahead of really all the other turrets in the 4 scopes that I've reviewed so far. And then the last thing on the pros is the build quality. I'm actually pretty pleased with this one. It didn't have the least amount of wiggle back here in the optic or in the objective lens on the back, but it was pretty low, and it gives you a big enough bump right here for your thumb so that you don't really need a throw lever sticking out, but you can still easily adjust that magnification ring. And just overall, the scope just has a good feel to it, from the quality of the turrets to the other features. I'm just very pleased with the overall construction. On to the cons. The reticle versatility on the other end, if you're wanting to try to put a scope on something for more versatile type of shooting or longer distance shooting where you want some drops to help you with your calculations and all that, you're not getting it with this one. So if that's the type of scope you want, they do make a BDC version of this. I just wasn't able to find it in the price range that I was looking for. So this one does not have it, but there is a version that does. The tight eye box. This one was not as tight as the Vortex, and so I didn't feel like including it in this review, but it does have a tighter eye box than the Sig Sauer and even than the Bushnell. So you need to be behind it properly when you're at that maximum magnification. Now at the bottom end of the 3, the eye box was actually pretty generous. It's just up there above about 8. It got pretty tight, and you get shadows that come in pretty quick. So then we'll move on to who do I think this is for. As I said, I think for just a general hunting or general plinking setup where you're going to have a 0 established and then just do some basic Kentucky windage type holds, I think the glass clarity and the simplicity of that reticle are going to make that a very easy task. For anybody who wants, a more complicated reticle that's going to do other things, this just simply isn't it. And then we'll talk about cost. Basically everywhere that I could find it, regular price, whether it was Amazon or Midway USA or like a local gun store that had it, it was 120 bucks. I did not see this in any place like Bass Pro Shop or Cabela's or Shields or Academy Sports. None of those had that. The easiest place to find this is going to be online. So if you really do like what you saw, I would just say look for it on Amazon or whatever optics website that you like Optics Planet or whoever. It's going to be $119.99. I really didn't see anywhere that it was on sale for less than that. I did find it, as with this one, on sale for less than that on eBay, which I was looking at that today and seeing between about 80 and 100 bucks used without the rings for this scope with the duplex reticle. And I think that's really all that I have to say about this scope. If you're still sticking around, I appreciate it. If you want to see more content like this, consider hitting that subscribe button and turning on those notifications. If you like this video, go ahead and click that like button. And if you have any comments on this scope or any suggestions for other budget scopes that you think I should review, go ahead and put those in the comment section. And with that, thank you for your viewership, and I will see you in the next video. Y'all have a good day.